Truth Espresso, episode 133.
Face it, we all would rather sleep in this morning. That's why God gave us espresso, to kickstart our zombified corpses into hyperdrive. And now, giving your mind and soul the morning shot of truth it craves. This is Truth Espresso with Daniel Minnick.
Hi there, and welcome to another exciting episode of Truth Espresso Express on the Truth Espresso podcast. I am your host, Daniel Minnick, and I am commuting to work on this Thursday, October 2nd, and this episode is slated for release Friday, October 8th. And this is going to be another Vax Vex Vortex. Last week I did an episode called the Vax Vex Vortex, and I pitted articles that I read against each other. So any episode I do on the Vax Vex Vortex is all about how some information talks about the problems or the waning effectiveness of vaccines, especially the Pfizer one. And then other articles will talk about how these things are being enforced on people, or, showing kind of the inconsistencies with things. And so I have a handful of articles here to look at, or that I've read last night, and we're going to talk about them. Oh man, it looks like traffic on the main drag headed to the highway is gotten a little full here. Wonder what's up. There's got to be an accident somewhere. Okay, so most of these articles that I read were from October 6th, yesterday, or 2 days ago when you hear this episode. There was one article I read from CNN that was about studies talking about that would confirm that the effectiveness of the immunity against COVID, statistically, from the Pfizer's vaccine wanes pretty quickly and pretty low. So from the last Vax Vex Vortex episode, I said something about that the immunity wanes down to about 42%. Well, now newer studies from Israel, and Israel seems to be the hotbed place where you get some good, reliable studies, because Israel is one of the most vaccinated nations in the world. They're kind of like, the clinical trial in this way for vaccine mandate policy, and they have their own vaccine passport system, and I've listened to a podcast with someone from Israel who was trying to navigate life in light of these the mask mandate and the vaccine mandate, and how you get the 2 jabs, you're fully vaccinated, but then Israel is kind of leading the way and getting booster shots for everyone, and so he's talking about how their vaccine card would be set to expire because, once boosters come out for the masses, then those who had the 2 shots would then be considered among the unvaccinated, and they need to get their 3rd shot to have their privileges in society again. Yeah, so thank you, Israel, for that policy, but Israel also seems to have lots of spikes in cases and hospitalizations despite being one of the most vaccinated nations in the country. But do you think U.S. policymakers will learn from that? Of course not. When it's a decision between power and truth, they will take power. Most of them are geared toward taking power because, scare people into falling in lockstep, being good little sheeple, while the policymakers rake in the money for their friends and enjoy their exclusive privileges. And, that sounds like I'm making things up there, but as we look at some of the articles later that I read, that is definitely true. So, according to this first article, and I'll have links to all the articles that I read in the show notes, studies from Qatar and Israel show, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine wanes considerably and quite quickly. In fact, a Qatar study showed that the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine could go down to as low as 20% after only 4 months. That's pretty crazy for a vaccine. You'd think that things like this would eventually take such a vaccine off the market because, statistically speaking, when you have the adverse effects, yeah, they're not 50%. They're still statistically quite low. But, if you have the potential for adverse effects for something that really doesn't protect you that much, then why do we have something like this being mandated except for politics? And think about the immunity, even according to this article, the immunity for traditional vaccines for things like, was it mumps and, measles, those type of things. The article, if I recall, it said something like effectiveness might wane about 5% per year. But, for these COVID mRNA vaccines, Pfizer in particular, the effectiveness wanes actually significantly after 2 months and can go down to 20% after 4 months. Now, at some point, what are we going to discover next month? That, the effectiveness wanes after 1 month to 0%? It seems like Pfizer's vaccine keeps getting lower and lower, yet we're seeing more and more mandates go into effect. And it's not like the mandates are saying get something like Moderna that is supposedly more effective, but it's just get an approved jab. And remember, the Pfizer's BioNTech was the one that's officially FDA approved under the label Comirnaty. And there's still the issue that Comirnaty, the officially FDA approved one, is not really as available yet as the emergency authorized BioNTech labeled one. And so people are being mandated to get something that could have adverse effects, doesn't really protect them very well, but their job is at stake. And yeah, there's your Vax Vex Vortex. And the article admitted that natural immunity from COVID-19 lasts a lot longer than the Pfizer vaccine. Well, you don't say. Wasn't that the science before this whole pandemic turned into a politic-demic? Yeah, so Israel has long been well ahead of the curve in trying to show the world how it's got to be done, how, hey, there's vaccines out, let's get them, let's order them, let's politicize them, let's force people to take it, let's implement vaccine passports, and people are going along with it there because they think that the government of Israel is some kind of holy thing, and so it's like these orders come from God himself, or it's like, kind of a tribal pride type thing, and, so I feel bad for the citizens of Israel having to put up with this kind of thing. I mean, it's still not as bad as the prison state of Australia, but yeah, Pfizer's vaccines, more and more studies show that it's less and less effective. Another article speaking of Israel, I did read another, actually it was the study article itself, talking about the adverse effects of myocarditis. You have a lot of doctors with their names on this article. This isn't a mainstream news article. It's an actual study, and I'll put a link to this one. So myocarditis, it had like a average 13 point something out of 100,000 for kids in the ages of 16 and 19. That was the highest age range for getting myocarditis. So this kind of goes to show that kids should not be getting these COVID vaccines. They're the ones who are least at risk from having complications from COVID, having, symptoms that really hurt them, because they're the healthiest against it, most likely, in their age range, but they're also the ones who will suffer the most statistically from adverse effects from getting these vaccines. So and this is an Israel study, because Israel's leading the way, so we get a lot of our statistics from things because Israel's leading the way here. And so unfortunately, thank you, Israel, for providing the rest of the world data like this. Now, one might say that 13 an average of 13, this was like from 9 to 19, so average to 13 in various studies out of 100,000 in this age range getting myocarditis. But that is higher than you'd mostly get from other approved vaccines. And Israel went whole hog on distributing Pfizer, and now they're doing the booster shots because, Pfizer's not very effective now. But, what's the solution to that? Not something else. Let's give more Pfizer, because, that's insanity there, that if something doesn't work very well, we need more of it, just like government policy. If dumping tons of money into a policy doesn't yield the results that are promised, well, the problem is you haven't spent enough money. We need to spend more money, because more of the same is what we need. The problem is that we just don't have more of it. Okay, moving right along. So those are articles talking about the problems with the vaccine. And now let's go into some articles that I read that are about, the mandates for these vaccines and the politics. So there was an article in the Daily News talking about our good friend Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York. And it seems like, isn't it ever possible for the mayor of New York City not to be some, I don't want to be about identity politics here, but, it seems like the mayor of New York is always some Italian guy with some obvious Italian name who seems to want to run New York City like he's from the mafia. And, so de Blasio, according to this article, justifies delaying COVID vaccine mandates for the police, the firefighters, and the corrections office, the Department of Corrections in New York. So various law enforcement agencies, government agencies here in New York, there were vaccine mandates. The New York's trying to do this vaccine passport thing. And remember, Denmark tried to do a vaccine passport. Things didn't work out so well, and now they're like Sweden. They're completely rolling back all COVID policies. So, yeah, why is it that Denmark and Sweden several years ago were, kind of like the hallmark of, examples of socialist policies? They're not entirely socialist. Yeah, they have a big welfare state, but other than that, they're quite capitalistic. But Bernie Sanders and AOC and most leftists would try to promote Denmark and Sweden as kind of the examples of socialist utopias. Whenever someone would try to bring up communist Russia and China, but well, why can't we follow their policies in regards to COVID now, especially Sweden? Because hardly anyone talks about Sweden, because Sweden's doing fine. But anyway, New York, Bill de Blasio, vaccine mandates, and we'll see as we get to other articles that other people are not so fortunate. Now, Bill de Blasio in this article, he's trying to talk about how he respects the intelligence of people, and that's why he's not pushing so hard on enforcing the vaccine the mandates on the police, the firefighters, and the corrections department. The government. But the New York federal court did uphold the mandate when the teachers, the New York public school teachers, some of them were pushing back, because their jobs are on the line, and the New York federal court upheld the mandate. Another article we'll look at in a bit was about a teacher who was really suffering. He was put on leave. But so, yeah, Bill de Blasio, he kind of like to say he respects individual decisions and intelligence for police and firefighters, and especially the corrections department, the good old boys. But for the teachers, they had to be vaccinated. Even their livelihoods, their personal decisions, and their intelligence isn't respected. So the citizens of New York, if I remember correctly, they have like an 86% average, vaccination rate for COVID vaccines. The teachers are at about 95%. You'd think that would be good enough for herd immunity to respect the other 5%, but no, we gotta have 100% compliance there by the deadline, else you gotta be put on leave without pay, and have your lives destroyed. You gotta be humiliated, until you budge and get that vaccine. But the corrections department, according to the article, they had less than half. They were like 49% of them had at least one of the jabs. So yeah, this is a case of rules for thee, but not for me. And that's your New York City mafia right there. Those in the good, those who are associated with the government and policies and enforcement, in the New York City mafia there, they don't have to have the mandates, but the school teachers have to have 100% compliance, or have their jobs on the line, their livelihoods on the line. So what's good for the goose in New York City here is not good for the gander? There's the New York City mafia for you, as I said again. Now, final article. Well, actually, no. I have two more to get to pretty quickly here. One of them is about a teacher, a New York City teacher who was put on leave without pay for refusing the vaccine. So de Blasio respects the intelligence and individuality and of the corrections department, but not the school teachers. And this school teacher, he had COVID in January, and he can prove that he has healthy antibodies and immunity. So he actually has the medical proof that he's immune to COVID. And, as we looked in an article early on in this episode, it admitted that natural immunity is much more effective against COVID than the very ineffective Pfizer vaccines. But, even against both jabs, the article did say that. But, policy, if you get 2 jabs of that, you can be allowed to teach in public school, even if you could get COVID, as this teacher said, and according to the policy, he's forced to be on leave without pay for a year, without the ability to be hired again until he gets the full vaccine regimen. So, hey, it's healthier for society that we force this guy to starve if he doesn't get a mandated shot or 2, or possibly eventually even 3, than for him to show his medical proof that he has better immunity than those shots themselves. But hey, policy, virtue signaling, the mafia. Final article on this Vax Vex Vortex. It was about, now this is shifting from New York to Colorado. So in Colorado, there is a university hospital that has reported that their policy is going to be that if you, for the unvaccinated, most likely, in most cases, I forget how they worded it, but in most cases, they're not going to do certain things like organ transplants. And in the case of organ transplants, both sides have to be fully vaccinated for that organ transaction to occur. So there was a patient needing a kidney transplant surgery, and this patient got put off the waiting list because she wasn't vaccinated, and the organ donor also has to be vaccinated. So, yeah, that's where we're headed, and I see this kind of thing spreading further than Colorado's University Hospital, because, I did mention in an earlier episode of Truthspresso Express that there are articles that are talking about that it's a moral thing, that we really should put the society pressure on the unvaccinated to get those jabs. Maybe they're going to have harder time finding work. Maybe, they're going to have a harder time finding, any of the pleasures of society until they get their vaccine card. They've got to get those jabs, even though they're not very effective here. But yeah, because policy, because virtue signaling, and because politics, look, we've got to enforce things, even because science, even though science is showing natural immunity's better, but hey, that's not fair. Not everyone can get natural immunity and survive COVID. So it's not fair. What's fair is the least common denominator. What's fair is having a one-size-fits-all policy of forcing people to take jabs that could potentially have adverse effects, that also, remember the studies about myocarditis, and especially in younger age brackets, but who cares, especially when what people are still taking right now is not even FDA approved officially. It's the emergency authorized use. So if any adverse effects happen against their will, against their desires, and getting jabbed against their desires, they have no standing for legal recourse. So because they're technically a part of clinical trials, is this where we've come, America? Is this where we've come, world? Is this where we've come, Christian? So Christians, my wife and I did that recent episode on Monday about that Christians should not support tyranny. I hope that those who most stand against this garbage are Christians. Let's lead the way, Christians, for opposing this nonsense. And there was the Vax Vex Vortex, episode number 2 on Truthspresso Express, and I just parked to go to work here, and so stay tuned for other episodes of Truthspresso and Truthspresso Express.
Thank you for waking up with Truthspresso. Good morning, and God bless your day.
Hey friends, Daniel Minnick here again. If you liked waking up to this episode of Truthspresso, I would really appreciate it if you would rate it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever application you use to listen to Truthspresso.